everything that's worth having is some trouble. You're listening to AMI Audiobook Review. I'm Jacob Shemansky with Ramya and Nusrin Abdul-Majid. Rams, that quote, more than anything, just reminds me of food. If you want to make a good recipe, you need good ingredients. Sometimes you just got to go out of the way to get the good spices and the good cuts of meat.
Quality, right? Quality is a big deal.
Exactly,
when it comes to food.
And I know for a fact that that quote was taken out of context the way I interpreted it, but I can do what I want. It's our show. Today we're reviewing This Summer Will Be Different by best-selling author Carley Fortune. It's a contemporary romance set in Prince Edward Island with themes of female friendship, chasing your dreams, oyster shucking, and a healthy amount of spice, not the type that you put on oysters. Carley Fortune's a bit of a critical darling, so today we're putting her latest book to the test. Plus, a little later, we're going to be talking to Cora Coady, who's going to be going through a rapid-fire review. But we're not doing this review on our own. Our friends from CELA are here, McKay and Theresa Power. Theresa Power is the Content Access Librarian, and McKay is the Communications Manager at CELA. Welcome.
Hi. Hello.
Okay, let's, just so everybody knows what we're reviewing here exactly, I'm going to read to you the synopsis. This summer, they'll keep their promise. This summer, they won't give in to temptations. This summer will be different. Lucy is the tourist vacationing on a beach house on Prince Edward Island. Felix is the local who shows her a very good time. The only problem is that Lucy doesn't know that he's her best friend's younger brother. Lucy and Felix's chemistry is unreal, but the list of reasons why they need to stay away from each other is long, and they vow to never repeat that electric night again. It's easier said than done. Each year, Lucy escapes to pay for a big breath of coastal air, fresh oysters, and nice vino verde with her best friend, Bridget. Every visit begins with a long walk on the beach, beneath soaring red cliffs and a red sun. And every visit, Lucy promises herself she won't wind up in Felix's bed again. If Lucy can't help being drawn to Felix, at least she's always kept her heart out of it. When Bridget suddenly flees Toronto a week before her wedding, Lucy drops everything to follow her to the island. Her mission is to help Bridget through her crisis and resist the one man she's never been able to. But Felix's sparkling eyes and flirty quips have been replaced with something new, and Lucy's beginning to wonder just how safe her heart truly is. This book's about 10 hours long, and it's available on CELA in human narrated audio, and for everybody else, it's obviously available on Audible. We have a quick sample for you.
Hungry? He asked. Starving, I replied, and I thought I saw his lip twitch. Where are you in from? His voice was deep and as dry as birch bark. His accent was thicker than Bridget's. His you more like a ya. How do you know I'm in from anywhere? I could be local. He held my eyes. Again, an exchange. A current zipping along a live wire. His focus drifted to my hair. Copper brown and braided into a crown around my head. And then to my outfit. His brow sketched up.
So Carley Fortune actually narrated her own book. That was the voice of the author. Let's start this review with going around the table and just giving, and everyone gives their quick thoughts, the short version of their thoughts on this book. We're reviewing this one by committee, and let's keep it spoiler-free for now. Karen, do you want to start with your bare bones thoughts on this book?
Sure. So it was a quick read. It was pretty light. I don't know if I would have continued reading it if it hadn't been for this group. But I think it's a good summer beach read for those who like romance. It was fairly decently paced. Like it went along, in a good pace. You wanted to kind of read the next page to see what was going to happen. But I didn't find it to have very much substance, which is maybe an unfair criticism of the book, given that it's, maybe not meant to have a lot of substance. It's supposed to be a light summer read. So I was kind of meh on middle of the road on this book.
Is a book without substance the main characteristic of a beach read? Like, what is a beach read?
Good question.
Good question. Yeah, very good question. I think for me, I don't want to define it for anybody else, but I think for me, a beach read, yeah, is something you can pick up and put down that you don't have to put a lot of mental energy into. You can watch the beach, watch your kids, listen to what's going on in the pool, whatever, without having, to miss any nuances of the book. So yeah, maybe it's one that doesn't have a lot of substance to it. I guess maybe that's a good
It's a vacation
analogy.
book.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Read what you
No,
love, read what you want.
of course.
But for me, I had not read any of her other books. And so I think maybe my expectations were a little or a little higher than what I actually encountered in this book.
Theresa?
I thought it was lots of fun to read. I thought it was very sexy. I think that there are there is substance there. There are nuggets that are really interesting to talk about in terms of putting friendships and romantic friendships ahead of other relationships there, and also the importance of female friendships and changing friendships as well. I really enjoyed that the book didn't necessarily end with maybe what people are expecting in the trope of the romance genre to end with. So I really like that. Yeah, I thought overall it was just a really fun, enjoyable read. And I really love the location as well.
Rams? Be honest.
Yeah, I will be, the location, because I'll go off of where you ended, Theresa, which is that the location was my favorite part. I'd say the geography, the kind of touching on Toronto and the gripes we have of Toronto traffic, like all of that, and then the running away to Prince Edward Island and the kind of gorgeous scenery, energy, lifestyle, community, even just like their family relationships with Bridget's family, were my highlights of the book. I thought those things were written very well and beautifully. If it comes down to like the actual substance, no substance spectrum, I thought the romance part of it was very typical, and I was like, okay, sure, like it was good, but it wasn't something that I would typically pick up, not even for a beach read or a vacation read. I just find it like not my genre. However, the female friendship part of it, Bea and Bridget's relationship and their kind of like honest look at what a codependent relationship is for the two of them, and then the other female relationships as well, like Bea and her aunt, just like all of those touch points were really, really interesting to me, and not just interesting, but felt very warm, like they were done very warmly and realistically.
I want to piggyback a bit off the relationship between Bridget and Bea, and just to say that Bridget is probably one of my favorite characters in this book. She just seems like one of these people that we all know, that like friends that we love but are very complicated in their own way, and she just felt like one of the most like fully fledged characters, despite not being the first person character, like the point of view of the book. For myself, I thought the book was it got off to a really bad start, to be honest. First of all, in like the second minute, we have smut, like right off the bat, and it's not super explicit, but it's also kind of cringe. It's like, yo, butter me up a little bit before we get into that, please.
The whole point was she did not need any buttering up, like fairly.
That's true, yeah. Yeah, that's true. But the characters really got me. I did also like Bea as a character, and Carley Fortune's writing is very good, and she's got these really funny lines throughout the book that really made me laugh. Like, she has a funny line about Felix, the main love interest, where she says, I forget exactly what she says, but I'm paraphrasing. She goes, "Oh, I just want to smother him up in butter and consume him." It's the weirdest thing, but it made me laugh so much.
She draws fun analogies. Yeah,
definitely. Lots of shucking puns, and one of you mentioned the setting does a lot of heavy lifting here. even in Toronto and in PEI. Like, she clearly did her research, and it's a love letter to Canadiana too. Like, it's an extremely Canadian book.
I always have to give, like, I don't know, like a round of applause or a pat on the back for a best-selling author that is best-selling but still sets their books in Canada, because there's many Canadian authors that are best-selling authors that purposefully do not set their books in Canada. They set them in the States as like an automatic for the audience. And so I really love that we have an author who is so popular and can do it with a book that's set in Prince Edward Island of
Yeah.
all places. I thought that was really great.
I think whoever said that I think it was you, Jacob, who said that the location and the setting does a lot of heavy lifting. I would agree with that. And I think one of the best things that I liked about this book was how beautifully and seamlessly she integrated bits of Canadian trivia. And there's some reference to some Canadian rock bands at one point. Just little bits of Canadiana into the book. I think she did that really well. It was not, it didn't feel to me like it was an overt dropping of, oh, here's some Canadian content to continue on with my theme. I think she did that piece really well. And I agree that the setting really was one of the things that made me enjoy the book. I found the characters to be a little bit predictable, a little bit one-dimensional. And interestingly, I think that the secondary characters were better done in terms of character development and getting to know them than either Felix or Lucy, which was a little bit disappointing. Like, I don't think her character development was fantastic. And I was reading it and I was thinking, this book is too long. Like, it feels like she's trying to drag us through 5 years, which again felt a little bit ridiculous in terms of a relationship. But the setting and those family relationships, I think, Ramya, you mentioned those, like, I wanted to be part of Felix's family. Like, you could just sort of feel that kind of warmth. And I wanted to meet the aunt, Stacy, because she sounded like a real character. Like, she sounded like
kick-ass
lots of
woman.
fun. Yeah, she sounded like
Right?
lots of fun. And you could see through the book where Carley was trying to sort of create those understories about relationships. But they fell kind of flat for me, like the tension between Lucy and her mom, because her mom calls her Goose. Like, it feels like it feels a bit sophomoric, I think. Anyway, that's sort of my take on it. I wasn't enamored with most of the characters, but I like some of the secondary characters for sure.
Sophomoric. What do you mean by that?
It feels like a first novel written by a really young author to me. It doesn't feel like it's got the maturity for some nuance, that it doesn't quite bring the characters to life. Like, I was reading it and I was sort of thinking that I think I know where she was trying to get, but it didn't, for me, those characters didn't get there, or they got there slowly, or they got there by skipping steps.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think that, like, honestly, this could have been just a romance, or it could have gone completely deep with the relationships, with the family affairs, with the female friendship part of things. And I felt like it did a little bit of both, but not enough of what I wanted on one side.
See, it's so interesting that you say that, because I wonder how the author landed on writing romance, because
Right.
there's a CBC article, and it was a little bit about how she always just wanted to be an author, and she was doing something else, and she kind of got the kick in the pants to quit that job, and she settled on doing romance. It was like very calculated about how she was going to go about the writing, and like how much she was going to do
Yeah,
a
she
day
had
or
a
a
full
week or whatever.
schedule.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. And it was all like very calculated. And to me, this book in some ways read like two ways. It was, one, I'm going to fulfill what romance readers want,
Mhm.
with that, that love and that, like, that sexiness and that relationship and all that stuff. And then the other half of it was something, like you said, like very different and very serious. And I would be very interested, because I think her writing is there. Like, I don't
Yes.
think that she's a bad writer by any means. I think a good part of it is just like fulfilling the tropes of the romance genre in many ways. I'd be very interested if she wrote outside of this genre and did something else. Maybe something, I don't want to say like serious or like literary, that is maybe a bit like outside of the scope of many people, except like some niche readers, but like, yeah, something outside of romance, because it seems to me like this book is kind of pulling in that way, and those are the not the juicy bits, but the books with the bits of more substance that I picked up on in this book that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, and none of us have read her other books previous to this one, right? She has 2 books, I believe, before this one, and she herself said this was much different than the others. And I'm very curious about the angles from the other ones, because as you said, Theresa, she mentioned, outright that she kind of dropped a career and went into writing, and specifically with this one, she wanted to get the research done on PEI. Like, she made 2 visits outside of pleasure just to understand what she was representing from the island, and then also the scheduling of the writing to get this out.
I couldn't believe that she'd only been to PEI 3 times.
Yeah, I know.
Because this spoke to me as someone who has been going there
like her entire life. Yeah.
Exactly. Like the love letter to that island. I've only been there once, and can really relate to like all the warm and like lovely things that she says about the island. It's absolutely amazing.
You know what I loved? I loved that I'd never been to PEI, but she had this kind of like the city girl's perspective of visiting PEI and falling in love with this, island / small town / lifestyle.
Right, because you grew up in Toronto.
Exactly.
Right? It's like perfect for you if you want to travel there without actually going there.
Exactly. And she made it sound like that. She's like, I'm kind of sick of the city, or, this is my getaway when I want to leave the city. And she has the best friend that kind of ropes her in and has the perfect family and, fun and all that other stuff that is completely opposite of what she grew up with. I loved that. It was so relatable for me on that level.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And apparently in the book, there was mention of this inn, the inn on the Bay of Fortune. It's Chef Michael Smith's place. I think it was either Bridget or Lucy said that they wanted to go there for a meal. And apparently reservations are like through the roof for this place. So the book is actually helping PEI tourism as well.
That's
like it paints
lovely.
that good of a picture that people are really wanting to go there. Yeah.
That's awesome.
I know. Yeah, from the first scene onwards, I was like, I want to eat there. I want to have what they're having. Yeah, that sounds beautiful.
And it is like exactly as she describes it too.
Have you been there?
Yeah, like I had oysters like right across the street from where the oysters are growing in the bay. I've had like lobster in the lobster shack. I've had a meal. I stayed at the Inn at the Bay of Fortune as well. Like it is really as it is described. It's amazing. She does a bang on job doing that. Yeah.
There's a lot of oyster shucking in this book. How difficult is it to shuck an oyster?
Very difficult. Like the likelihood of you stabbing yourself, I think, is probably pretty high in the beginning.
Oh my!
I will say, there's a very prominent oyster shucking competition scene that, as I was reading it, all I could think of, this is the weirdest book.
Yeah.
This is the weirdest thing I've ever read, but I'm so into it right now.
Yeah.
And
I had that moment as well, Jacob, like right in the middle where you kind of zoom out. Yeah, I zoom out and I'm like, what is happening? But you were so invested, like at that point.
Yeah, I really wanted him to win that competition too. It was so good as he sexily shucks oysters. It was so good. It was like my favorite scene.
Oh gosh.
But the thing is, people say like oysters are aphrodisiacs, right? So there's like the practical oyster shucking
Yeah,
that
it's true.
happens in Prince Edward Island, but then there's also
That's the
like this
foreplay.
undercurrent of something else to it too.
It's true.
Okay, so I think it's pretty fair to say that none of us on this reviewing committee like fully love this book. Like none of us give it a 10 out of 10 or even anything close to that. Let's get into the negatives. And what's
I give it an 8 out of 10, Jacob.
really?
Oh, okay.
Is that
Okay.
okay?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
that's pretty
I
solid. I
really
stand
liked
corrected.
it. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
you're bringing up the average then.
Yes.
Okay.
Let's
Yeah.
let's dive into a little bit of what's dragging this one down. So negatives, Karen, do you have anything to share?
I have to say, after the first one or two, I sort of just skipped the sex scenes. They were just formulaic. It was like, ugh, I did a lot of eye rolling, um, which is funny because that's kind of kind of the purpose of a romance book. But that's part of where my comment came from in terms of it feels a little bit like a young writer with an early book. I actually said to my husband, I'm going to age myself here. It felt a little bit like the Judy Blume book. Actually, I think Judy Blume did a better job of it with what was it called? 16. Like it just felt young. So I have kids the ages of the characters when they first are starting in this book. And I was thinking about where my kids are developmentally in terms of like maturity, and these characters just felt really, well, particularly Lucy felt really immature to me, which kind of annoyed me. And I was talking to a girlfriend of mine, and I said, I'm kind of beyond the 25-year-old romance thing. Like, I want to know about a man. I want to know, does he read? Is he emotionally intelligent? Does he cook? Does he put the seat down? Like, those kinds of things. And actually,
Karen, do you want like the Golden Bachelor version of this book? Is that where you're
I have no
at?
idea. No,
Oh,
Wow.
do you know the show The
but
Bachelor at all?
yeah, yeah,
Okay,
from
well
when
they
it
have
came
the
on, like 25 years ago.
they have like the Golden Bachelor version, which is not the 20 to 25, but like the 40 plus people looking for
And
love.
maybe that's what I mean. Anyway, I think Felix developed from a character. Like I came to really like Felix, but Lucy just felt really immature to me, which was a block for me in this book for sure. That would be my biggest negative, I think, was character development.
Karen, you said the quiet part out loud earlier. That are the sex scenes the point of romance books? Is that
No. It
But
can't be.
every review I read online always mentions the spice. It seems
If
like it's
you're-
a
if
very
you're-
important part of it.
It's becoming more normal. Like, on average, romance books are now like what I used to be like, oh, this is erotica. Like, this is its own thing. It would be like you'd have to go looking for books with explicit sex scenes if you actually wanted that in your romance read. But now, yeah, it's all kind of bundled in, right? And Theresa, I feel like you could talk on this more just because you have like more experience reading these kinds of books. But I don't I'm seriously on Karen's side of this. I found the sex scenes to be way too typical and cookie cutter. And I found myself like really going, is that it? Like it was very, described in ways that feel typical. The actual scenes felt very typical. Like the romance trajectory itself felt like it wasn't, other than the fact that they were seeing each other once a year, potentially, and trying to stay away from each other. Like all that felt like that yin yang felt very, used. Yeah, I wasn't a fan of the romance, not because it wasn't written well, and not because if you were looking for that thing you weren't satisfied, but I was like, maybe there should be more diversity. I'm not sure.
Diversity in what?
I
Yeah.
don't know. Character and story in sex scenes in like
And I think that it
scenarios.
exists. I think that exists in romance. It just wasn't this book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the one great thing about the romance genre, I would say, out of other genres, is that diversity piece, whether it's in like sexual orientation, whether it's in like racial background, has become far more open and accommodating to those narratives than some other genres that I've read. And you see like you just see a lot more of it now in the contemporary romance genre. It is like, same-sex relationships, people from different backgrounds or whatever. Like there are a lot of books and a lot of those narratives out there.
For me in this book, like I felt like the romance scenes were, or the sex scenes were sort of inserted into it on a formulaic basis. Like not reading them didn't affect the book for me. Like I don't think that they were necessary the way that they were written.
See, and that goes back to what you were saying, Theresa, earlier about it feeling like two different books or two different purposes, not necessarily coinciding.
Yeah. Do you think that maybe what we're saying isn't necessarily like the book is bad, but that this particular book or this genre maybe just isn't your cup of tea? Because I think
I 100% say that for myself.
There's a lot of people that I think love those scenes, and enjoy those scenes, and like kudos. I think that the romance genre has gotten a lot of poo-pooing as something that you have to read behind like closed doors and no one can know. Like, I have to say, like, would I necessarily have picked this book as the first book to read outside of this? Like, maybe not, but that's just because I have a huge pile of books that I read in genres that I kind of prefer over it. But I still really enjoyed this book for all of those things, So.
If I can throw in just one last small nitpicky complaint, and I read this book I read this book with my partner, and one thing we noticed is that B, the main character, is so thirsty and just constantly describing how sexy Felix is. And I mean constantly.
Yeah, but that's not a fair
every
assessment.
part of his body. I know every part of his body in detail.
But we don't know until they come out with a version of from his point of view how thirsty he was for her, because we only knew from his eyes, right?
Oh, that's a good point. It might have been mutual thirst. Okay,
yeah,
that's fair.
Of course.
That's fair. My point is, it got a bit obnoxious at the end. Oh, like, what is this for? And Karen, you mentioned that like the sex scenes were unnecessary, but I think the point of sex scenes isn't that deep. Like, nobody is writing sex scenes to move the plot forward. It's exclusively to be sexy.
However,
that's it.
I don't know about that. I would disagree with you on that.
I think there's tension. There's tension build up, and you can get to the sex scene and feel like all that stuff was leading up to that. But if it's like a sex scene every 5 pages, it feels a little different, right?
You're kind of on the edge of your seat in a way, because she's always like, oh no, I'm not gonna do it. It's not gonna happen. I'm gonna be like a good girl, and we're just friends, big quotation marks. And you're like, is it? Yes, it is. Okay.
Yeah.
There was no suspense for me in that. It was like, yes, they're going to. Like, we have to go through 5 years of this until we get to the point where we figure out what
they want a real relationship aside from the sex. Yeah, exactly.
But there's that, I don't know, for me, there was like that little moment, like, oh, maybe she's going to do like a little twist. Because there are twists, a few twists in the book as well. So, maybe this is going to be the one time that she doesn't. But,
It was sweet.
Yeah.
It was sweet.
It was. I think if you love romance, this is a great book for you. I think that it's a fun read. I think that she writes it well. Like, the characters are, I think she writes it well. But if you're looking for something that, you're going to dig in deep with a book club with your girlfriends or whatever, this maybe is not the book.
Yeah,
No.
Karen, I think you put a really good bow on this conversation. And we're not going to give this a number score, or 3 to 5, 4 to 5, 5 to 5 stars, or anything like that. We're just going to let you digest all the comments here, and you can judge for yourself if you want to read this book or not. So that's This Summer Will Be Different by Carley Fortune, and again, that's available on CELA in human narrated audio. After the break, I'm going to be doing rapid fire review with Cora Coady. I'm Jacob Shamansky. You're listening to MI Audiobook Review. We'll be right back. You're listening to AMI Audiobook Review. I'm Jacob Shamansky, back with Ramya and Nishin Abdulmajid in the back. She's the adult in the room, making sure we're not going off track. Let's do some rapid fire review. Rams, I always like RFR because there's review in the name, but I kind of see it more as a platform for our guests to give recommendations. That's what I want the show to be a lot of curation recommendations.
Yeah, definitely recommendations have been taken off of rapid fire review, then reviewed later by us because we're like, ooh, that's a good book, I want to read it. So 100% we're taking notes, and you should too.
Yeah, and I did that very recently with the Brian Burke book. I absolutely devoured it after Jeff Ryman recommended that one. Amazing read. I wouldn't mind doing a little review on that one on that show. The short version is that it's awesome. It's so worth it. Cora Coady is our guest this week. Cora, welcome.
Hello.
How do I know the connection is between you and Ramya. How do you guys know each other?
Do you want me to say?
Yeah.
Okay.
You have the shortened version.
The shortened version is that I was an independent living skills specialist at the CNIB, and Ramya was one of my first students when she was, lest I say a child, she was about 11. I have popped back in and out of her life as an ILS for quite a while, a decade or so, and recently I switched careers to become a librarian, and I ran into Ramya at the Ontario Library Association Super Conference.
Yeah, that was awesome because I was there to hang out with CELA friends and talk about audiobooks today, essentially, and ran into Cora, and I was like, whoa, two worlds meet. And also, Cora's the one who taught me how to knit, so this is a very special bond.
And that's a classic audiobook activity.
Yes, full circle.
Full circle. Okay, so you guys go way back, and another CNIB person, which we've had quite a few on the show so far, including Amr Khan.
Not that they're not all special. It's not just another CNIB person. They're all unique.
Not another one. All right, let's get started. I really like the selections you chose here, just based on the titles. These seem kind of out there, especially the last one. But Rams, do you want to do the first one?
Okay, so the first one, because we have 5 titles, and you have 15 seconds on the clock to review/recommend these titles after I say what it is and who it's by. All right, here we go. Moon of the Turning Leaves by Waubgeshig.
Yes, so this is actually a sequel, but you don't have to have read the first book in order to enjoy this book. It's post-apocalypse. It's about 10 years post-apocalypse, and there's a small Anishinaabe community that is moving out to look for other survivors and a new place to live.
A new place to live? What happened to the first place?
So if you've ever read the first book, it's called Moon of the Crusted Snow, and there's like a big power shutdown, and possibly some other things happen, but basically the world deteriorates and everybody's disconnected, and then people become sick. And so this community of people who had been living on the reservation, they move off into the woods to sort of regain the Anishinaabe style of living. So this is like a Indigenous community of people. And they've been living in this remote community for about a decade, and their food sources are becoming scarce, and they realize that they have to move. So they go back and try to seek out their former homeland. It's a big adventure.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I got in the sense of it. It's a big adventure.
All right, next one. Weapons of Math Destruction: How Big Data Increases Inequality and Threatens Democracy by Cathy O'Neill.
Okay, so for this book, I think the title really explains it well. It's a little bit old now, from 2016, and I think I like it because it's really accessible for someone who's not a data or a math person. You get an understanding of, oh dear.
Of what?
You get an understanding of how data and statistics have been used to create a sort of like a negative feedback loop of inequality.
Oh.
I think it's
okay, we're gonna get back
things that
to this
everybody
one.
should know, but at this point, like, it's a good sort of base layer of information about how math is used for lots of positive things, but also for, enhancing or sustaining inequality.
That is intriguing. And you said it might be a little old now. I'm curious about the nuances of that.
2016, and now we're in 2024, and I think like technology is always advancing, and the way that technology is used for surveillance and like the gathering of information on people is perhaps even more pervasive than it was a few years ago.
For sure.
So if anything, it might be worse than what's portrayed in the book.
Well, possibly, yeah. We could hope that
Possibly.
people learn lessons, but I don't know.
Yeah. But as we learn certain levels of lessons, then technology advances astronomically, right? So how aware are we? Anyway, okay, let's continue on. The third book for rapid fire review with you is Warriors, Dawn of the Clans #1, The Sun Trail by Erin Hunter.
Okay, so this is a children's book. It's part of the huge, enormous Warrior Cat collection. It's a book about cats, feral cat colonies. You got cat romance, cat politics, cat adventures. The narrator is excellent as well. He does all kinds of cat voices.
Oh my gosh. Cat politics.
Cat politics. There are lots of forbidden cat romances.
Get out of here.
What an eclectic selection of books you have here, Cora.
So my family actually loves this series of books, and I've listened to so many of them that to me they drive me a little bit crazy now, but I know that they're very popular, and I think that the audiobook narrator, McLeod Andrews, he does like such an excellent job with bringing the cats to life. It's a good recommendation, yeah.
How does he do that? How does he bring cats to life with his narration?
Okay, so the cats are anthropomorphized. So they're talking. They have, obviously, their things to say to each other and about the world in general. But he has, like, different voices. So there's cats that are senior citizen cats, and there's kittens and, you know, cats that are supposed to be burly and aggressive type cats that he has different voices for.
I just love that this collection is so huge that the reviews must be huge as well.
Does this have notes of comedy or is this dramatic? Like, I'm kind of confused as the tone. Yeah, like, what's the tone like in this book?
So there are notes of comedy, but it's mostly, I would say, drama. And it's it is actually a huge collection of books. It's a huge collection of books about cats, and it's called the Warrior series. And one thing I can say though is that Erin Hunter is not a real person. It's a it's a collective pseudonym. So there are several authors who are writing under that name. But I honestly can't tell who's writing which book. They just seem to work well together. So
it's unified.
I thought you were going to say he was a cat.
No,
that was a bit of a cliffhanger.
It's a collective pseudonym. I was disappointed when I heard that it was a collective pseudonym, but I was more disappointed when I heard that Betty Crocker was not a real person. So.
Oh, true. Yeah.
Betty Crocker. Is she not a real person?
Not a real person.
Yep.
I feel bamboozled. Wow.
Yep, me too.
It is kind of weird when you realize that a book series is written by a bunch of people. Like, as long as there's like some continuity, I can understand why you would be okay with that and might not even realize it. But like, you would like on principle for a series to come from a single person, you know?
I mean, if it's a children's book collection that you know is going to be a mass hit, and it's more about the concept than the individual book, I can kind of understand something like this being co-written or group written, if you will.
Okay. Yeah, I can get behind that.
That's a good point. Yeah. And it's so massive. So there are so many books that if one person was writing all of them, they would have to devote their entire career to these cats. So
right. Which they might not mind doing. So funny.
Okay, moving on. We're taking a lot more than 15 seconds per book, but we make the rules, so
sorry.
We also enforce them. So or not. Okay, next. Never Whistle at Night, an Indigenous dark fiction anthology. Edited by Shane Hawk and Theodore C. Alston.
Okay, so this is an anthology of Indigenous sort of mythology and horror stories. There's 26 stories. It's got a lot of diversity in mythology from Indigenous communities. Little trigger warning, it can be a little violent.
Okay, all right. Maybe we'll come back to that one because I want to hear about this last one. So the last title
with Cora Coady's rapid fire review is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett.
So this is actually an adventure book. It doesn't really sound like an adventure book from the title, but it's about a professor who studies fairies, and she's going on this big adventure into, I guess it's like a northern European country, looking for fairies.
Did you mean to stop there?
I could have said more, but
Right.
What kind of fairies, though? Because I've seen the word fairy attributed to different types of mythical creatures. Like, what are the fairies like in this book?
so specifically the fairies that she's looking for are like, they're called the Lost Ones, and they're fairies that are specific to this northern European region that she's in, which I feel like it might be something kind of like Sweden, but it doesn't specifically say Sweden.
Okay.
There's a lot of adventure in it. She gets into trouble, and it's written in a very sort of, I think, purposely pretentious way. But some people might not like that part of it, that the writing style. But if they like something like Veronica Speedwell mysteries, then they would also like this book.
Purposely
I would read the sequel.
pretentious.
Yeah, I would read the sequel, but it is like a little bit pretentious. And the main
But
characters,
purposely, though.
yeah, the main character's a little, you don't love her, but she's okay.
Do you mind that, though?
Yeah, do you mind that? Yeah,
I don't mind
like,
it.
What
It
is it
makes
like as a
it-
reader?
It makes the person feel like more human, I think.
Right. Because I would say that's not necessarily a newer concept, but something that we maybe don't converse about a lot, because we're used to that literature where, you know, your protagonist is your protagonist is your protagonist. And then now we're kind of like, yeah, but everyone's flawed, so it's okay if, you know, the protagonist is a bit more flawed than we're used to, and maybe we can even relate to the enemy a little more, kind of thing, right?
There's definitely a push away from making the main character kind of a stand-in for the reader. Someone
Yeah.
that's kind of very vanilla and malleable. I think of like Harry Potter as a character that's kind of like that. Like, he's a bland character, but like, let's
Yeah,
be
but
real.
not book 4 onwards. We're not gonna get into it.
I
We're not.
disagree, but we're not going to get
Yeah,
into
we're
it.
not gonna get into it.
Which one of these 5 books did you want to elaborate on? Although you did touch already a little bit because we were so eager to hear more about them. Which one of these 5 books do you want to give a little more context on?
I guess I can talk a little bit more about weapons of math destruction.
Okay. Yeah. We'd like to know more,
Yeah.
for sure. Is this, okay, based on the title and what you've told us, it sounds like one of these books about how people can lie with stats and how gathering stats can be a bit of a precarious business. Am I wrong? Am I way off?
It's not so much about purposely, like it's not so much about the intention being to lie with statistics. The intention is more that they're gathering data. Let's say, for example, they're taking data on where the most arrests are happening in the city. So then they decide that that's where they need to put the most police presence. And then that means that more arrests are going to be happening there because there's more police there. And this seems like a great idea, but in reality, what it's doing is it's helping to compound the issues that are already taking place within those neighborhoods. So if you have, for example, somebody who had a minor drug offense, let's say they possessed marijuana, which wouldn't happen really like in the city, but you wouldn't be arrested for it. But if you're in America or somewhere else that has not legalized marijuana, it would be an issue. So you have a person who possesses marijuana, let's say they're a student or a young person, and they get arrested for it. They might get kicked out of school. They might not be able to pay their court fees. They might have to like go to jail for a certain amount of time. Whereas if the same type of young person, let's say they're in school, was also arrested for, was also in possession of marijuana in a place where they would not likely be arrested, they would face none of the same things would happen to them. Similarly, we can think about the data collected for insurance. So they're collecting data on people's health statistics, and they might decide they don't want to insure somebody for a certain type of disease because they fit the typical model of what a person would be for high risk. So that negatively impacts their life experiences. So it's really more about how we need to scrutinize the way data is collected and what the results of that data collection is.
So is this a nonfiction?
It is a nonfiction. I should have said that, right?
Okay. Yeah, and is it written in an accessible style, or is it kind of academic? Because I like to make the distinction between those.
I feel that it's very accessible, specifically because I'm not into like math or statistics myself, and I understood it. It's kind of like an overview of how data is collected and used that I think most people would understand. And when we're talking about the audiobook, the author herself narrates it, so she does like a really good job of explaining her own perspective on it as a statistician.
Yeah. It's, as you were kind of explaining the examples of things that this book covers, it made me think about our outlook on media and a lot of the kind of, beware the media, or the media has the power to ... or, what is propaganda and misinformation? Like, we have a lot of these conversations lately, right? Especially with social media platforms and biases that we have to recognize as individuals scrolling through our phones, because there isn't just like a catch-all sentence on the homepage being like, and FYI, all of this is, editorial journalism. And so it kind of feels like a deeper layer of that concept, Cora. And I'm not sure if this is just an interpretation thing that for me, but it feels like a deeper concept of, understanding how important it is to understand how data is collected, because or else we just see like what's being put out and not necessarily recognize the nuances or the dangers of just taking data at face value.
Right, because you can see the results of any kind of survey or any kind of stat gathering
anything
activity,
like
but you don't really see the input. You see the output, but you don't see the input.
And you also see like skewed versions, if you will, right? Like sometimes we'll see stats and then we take it as like a blanket statement to mean something, whereas if you dig a little deeper, you may understand like, okay, this study was conducted this way, or this study was conducted when this was an issue. Like there are a lot more nuances than we realize or take in.
Yeah.
I am really interested in this one, but Cora, are there any specific passages in the book that really stuck to you? Like if you can give us like an example of the types of observations the author makes?
There was one specific story about an award-winning teacher who lost his job because there was an algorithm used to judge, which teachers were worthy of keeping their jobs or promotion based on what the student scores were. And they didn't take into account all of the other myriad of, I don't want to say issues, but the complexities of what goes on in a school district or school area, and classrooms that have students with higher needs. So there were several court cases that went on in the States with situations like that. But I think also just a general knowledge of how much we're being monitored.
Yeah.
Like the GPS in a person's car, your fitness watch might be collecting your data and sending it to insurance companies, like all kinds of things like that.
Oh my God. Is that happening?
Yeah. I mean, like you would have to read your user agreements and see if what you're using is doing that. But
are those available in audiobook format?
Oh, that's a good question.
Probably not.
You could probably find a PDF and see if you could get your screen
Yeah.
reader to read them.
Or put the PDF in an AI and ask it questions.
Ironically.
Yeah.
Do you think a lot of this book is just to, like, obviously this whole thing is an FYI, you know, this is what's happening. But do you think a lot of it is to scare us and to make us understand that our personal identities are being used as data all over? Like right now, you know, Jacob had this reaction, right? Like, oh, is that really happening? Do you have a lot of that throughout the book?
I don't think that is like the main intention, but it should be one of the things that you're gathering from it. Because that is what's happening. I think the main intention was more to make people aware that a lot of the statistics and data that are being used are compounding inequality. But you know, you always hear like people say things like numbers don't lie, but they're not necessarily accounting for all information.
Mm-hmm.
Right, it might not be a lie, but it's just not telling the whole truth.
Right.
So I think while numbers are very accurate in a way, they do kind of omit the whole truth. Cora, that book was Weapons of Math Destruction by Cathy O'Neill, but we will include all 5 of your recommendations in the podcast descriptions. But before we go, I wanted to ask you, what's your relationship with audiobooks? Like, have you always been an audiobook listener? Do you read print occasionally? Like, how often do you listen to audiobooks? I'm always curious about this.
I can't say that I've always been an audiobook listener. I think for most of my adult life, I have enjoyed listening to audiobooks. I do also read print. I like to read audiobooks, as we mentioned earlier, if I'm doing something like knitting or crocheting. If I'm on public transit, I'll listen to audiobooks frequently and then also knit and crochet. If I'm doing things around the house, I also enjoy my audiobooks, cleaning, things like that. But I do also read print.
Okay, once in a while. So I guess the decision between audiobook and print has to do with what needs to get done around the house.
I'd say I read audiobooks pretty regularly, but I will read print if I'm going to try to go to sleep.
Oh, interesting.
That is interesting.
Because
To
lots of
tire you
people fall
out?
asleep.
Well, I know if I fall asleep when I'm reading the print book, that I'm not missing anything because I wake up and it's left off in the same place. But I could fall asleep during an audiobook, and if I haven't set a timer on it, it will just keep going. So
That is fair. Sometimes we set a timer and still fall asleep way too early. Still skipping around.
You know my thoughts on that. But Cora,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
thank you. Thanks for having me.
That was Cora Coady for our rapid fire review. Again, I'm going to put all of the 5 audiobooks that she recommended in the podcast description. I'm really interested in that Weapons of Math Destruction book. All right, that's all the time we have for this episode. You can call us toll free at 1-866-509-4545 for any feedback you may have for us. You can also leave us an email at feedback@ami.ca. I'm Jacob Shamansky. Ramya Amathan was with me. Nishin Abdalmajid is our technical producer. Thanks for listening.